Well, I think that it's unfortunate that we've had to commit to a specific timetable for the departure of combat forces and the departure of American forces. Of course, that was a decision that President Bush made and that President Obama has accepted. I think we saw with the transition to the out of the cities situation in June that giving the enemy a timeline allows the enemy to plan attacks accordingly, and we did see a surge of enemy activity around the withdrawal of American forces from the cities. So I think it's always unfortunate when if you to publicly to announce and commit yourself to a timeline. That having been said, I think that the timeline so far appears to be reasonable and feasible. I think that the big question will be how long does it take to seat an Iraqi government after the parliamentary elections, and what are the aftermath? What are the effects of that? Because the withdrawal of most American combat forces is scheduled to begin within a couple of months after that election, and past evidence suggests that it might take longer than that. So being on a hard timeline may turn out to be unfortunate. Well, General Odierno has made pretty clear what he has in mind. He's designing an organization he calls an Advise and Assist Brigade, and I think it remains to be seen exactly what that looks like. But the general concept is that that's a force that can continue to help train and mentor Iraqi units, and it can also provide rapid reaction and other kinds of support to them at their request if they feel it necessary. But that fundamentally the purpose of that organization is to support the Iraqis as they continue to fight whatever remnant terrorist or insurgent groups are left. The Iraqi security forces are doing well. They were tested. They are still being tested as we speak in September. The enemy certainly has made it a point to go after them and try to expose all of their weaknesses. Obviously, the enemy's gotten off a few successful attacks, including the one on the foreign ministry. The Iraqi security forces, I think, so far have responded well. They've responded with restraint. They've responded professionally. They recognized when they've made mistakes. They're going through, I think, a lessons learned process here to try to get better, all of which is healthy. So at this moment, I'm not terribly concerned about their ability, with our continued support, to handle the situation. I think it's too soon to make an estimate, frankly, about how things will be a year from now. I think there's a real danger of Americans in general and the Obama administration in particular taking its eye off the ball in Iraq. And I think that it was distressing when the President gave a very excellent speech at the Veterans of Foreign Wars in August and spoke very strongly on Afghanistan. The line on Iraq was still pretty much end this war. And what distresses me about that is that the war is ending as far as American involvement is concerned, and frankly even as far as fighting on the ground in Iraq goes. So the question that President Obama really has to ask and answer is not are we going to end this war, when are we going to end this war, but what are we going to do with the peace? And what are we going to do to build on the sacrifices that we've made, and what are we going to do to build on the successes that we've achieved in order to try to develop an enduring partnership with Iraq, which I think could become a real key pillar of American policy in the region, and a real force for a lot of things that we care about in the region. I'd like to remind people there's no country in the world that has lost more soldiers and policemen in the fight against al-Qaeda than Iraq, by a long margin. And there are very few countries in the world that are as absolutely committed to fighting against that organization as Iraq is. So considering the emphasis that President Obama has placed upon making sure that we never give back to al-Qaeda ground that we've won from al-Qaeda, supporting Iraq is very important. But I'm afraid that as we focus on Afghanistan and as we have this holdover election era rhetoric about ending the war in Iraq, that we may miss an opportunity that we won't be able to retrieve. Well, I think that if American leaders and Americans continue to look to the Iraqis and say, what have you done lately to show us that you're interested in having a long-term relationship with us, and until you do something, then we're not interested, then we're in the position of people who are waiting, after you. The truth of the matter is that the Iraqis have done a variety of things that should give us a strong indication they're interested in long-term partnership with us. In particular, they have rejected just about every Iranian demand or request for how to orient their political policies, how to orient their military strategy, their military policies. The Iranians have been pushing Iraq consistently to set a much more rapid deadline for American withdrawal, a deadline for complete American withdrawal, which now even Prime Minister Maliki has indicated he might not be so sure that he wants us to leave entirely. The Iranians were pushing very hard for the Iraqis not to sign a security agreement of any variety with us. They did. The Iranians were pushing for a unified Shia coalition in this election. The Iraqis did not form such a coalition. And in general terms, I think it's very clear that the Iraqis, both Sunni and Shia, and of course the Kurds, would like to maintain a strong relationship with the United States, if only because that's the only way that they can maintain any degree of independence in the region. If they do not have a strong relationship with us, then they will end up falling under the sway of Iran. And despite a lot of rhetoric to the contrary, largely by people who have not spent a whole lot of time talking with Iraqis and following the situation there, the Iraqis are Arabs, and they are not at all pleased at the prospect of getting into thrall with the Persians. That's not okay with them. And the Iranians have been remarkably ham-handed in the way that they deal with Iraqis and make it clear to the Iraqis that they expect to be able to give them orders that will be followed and so forth. So for all of those reasons, I think there is a natural set among the Iraqi elite to desire some sort of close relationship with the United States. What exactly that will be remains to be determined. But I think there's enough evidence of that we should be pushing from our end to say, we think this is in our interest too. Let's talk about what concretely we can do. The emergence of Iraq as a responsible stakeholder in the region is something that we have no precedent for in the last 50 years or so. Iraq has been either a basket case or a predator or in some other way a threat to the international order and order in the region for going back to Saddam's coup, and frankly going back even before that. So actually having Iraq emerge as a reasonably stable polity that is not predatory and that is not itself unstable and attempting to destabilize its neighbors will be in itself an extremely positive development in the region. On the other hand, it does distort an equilibrium that had grown up, where the Saudis were one pole of the equation, the Iranians were another pole of the equation. Now you have a third pole, if I may, because Iraq will not be subservient to Saudi Arabia. In fact, there will always be tension between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, especially between a Shia government in Iraq and Saudi Arabia. But Iraq is a very important, powerful state in its own right. I think that developing relationship can be very positive if we help to guide it in a good direction. Because I think that breaking up that bipolarity within the system is good for us. And I also frankly think that we have more interests in common with Iraq than we do with Saudi Arabia. I think over the long term, we have a much better prospect of a lasting and mutually beneficial relationship with Iraq than we do with Saudi Arabia. And so I think that for all sorts of reasons, that's why I think there's a real opportunity here. If we could get past the end this war rhetoric and start to think about what to do with the fact that we've succeeded, I think there's a lot of opportunities to transform the regional politics in very positive ways. Yes, I think it's very clear that the Iraqi government is and will remain much more committed with much less ambiguity or ambivalence to the fight against al-Qaeda than the Saudi regime, which is interwoven with Wahhabi clerics, will ever be. There will always be some division within the minds of Saudi leaders because of the nature of the state. There will probably not be any division within the minds of Iraqi leaders. Both the Saudis and the Iraqis are very chary of Iranian influence in the region and liable to resist it. But the Iraqis see themselves as serving as a bridge between Iran and the Sunni world and also the United States. And as I talk to Iraqi politicians on both sides, but especially Shia politicians, they make it clear that they really do have a vision in which they can be a conduit for conversation. They don't want to be the theater in which a war is played out between the United States and Iran. They do want to be a go-between, an arbiter something that stands a little bit more in the middle than Saudi Arabia. And that can be a very positive development as well. And then, of course, it's in our interest to have Saudi Arabia have less control over the percentage of the world's oil supply that it does. And when you look at the reserves of Iraq and the potential reserves of Iraq, if they can get foreign investment in there really to develop the fields, then we can reduce the Saudi monopoly on that, or the Saudi preponderance of that, which will be in everybody's interest as well. So there are a lot of reasons that I think we have in common with Iraq, and I want to stress that this is not just my reasoning about common interests. When you talk to Iraqis, these are the things that they will tell you. When you talk to Iraqi political leaders, these are things that they will say. And I think that's very important to keep in mind. They imagine a relationship based on these common interests. And since it serves us, I think, in effect, they are holding a hand out to us, and we would be foolish not to grasp it.